Israel-Palestine conflict, which flared up again on October 7, 2023, is not just a modern clash but rather the continuation of a deeply rooted struggle filled with layers of history, religion, identity, and territorial disputes that span thousands of years. And to understand why this conflict remains one of the most difficult disputes of modern times, we must trace it back across centuries of shifting empires, displaced peoples, divine promises, and political upheavals. For while many contemporary discussions trace its origins to the establishment of Israel in 1948, its roots actually go back nearly 3,000 years, beginning in the 8th century BC, when the territories that are now identified as Israel and Palestine were under the dominion of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel, political manifestations of Jewish tribes who claimed divine promise to this land through their ancestor Abraham, as written in the Old Testament, while at the same time the ancestors of the Palestinians, often identified as Philistines in ancient scriptures, occupied the coastal stretches of land from Gaza to modern-day Tel Aviv. And as these early societies grew, rival empires sought to control them, leading to centuries of conquests that shaped the destiny of the land, beginning with the Assyrians under King Sargon II, who in 722 BCE annexed the Kingdom of Israel, scattering its people through forced displacement, a strategy designed to break national identity and prevent rebellion, which led to Jews gradually assimilating into different cultures across the Assyrian Empire, yet still clinging to their sense of being a chosen people. And then in the late 7th century BCE, the Babylonians replaced the Assyrians as the new imperial power, taking control of Jerusalem and eventually destroying Solomon's temple in 587 BCE after Jewish resistance, an event that led to the Babylonian exile, in which the Jewish population was uprooted and scattered again. But history turned once more in 539 BCE, when King Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon and allowed the exiled Jews to return to Jerusalem, sponsoring the rebuilding of Solomon's temple in a gesture that forever earned him honor among the Jewish people. And as centuries passed, the region fell under new masters again when the Romans arrived in 63 BCE, incorporating Jerusalem into their vast empire. And Roman rule proved to be harsh and tumultuous for Jews, sparking revolts such as the Great Revolt in 66 CE and the Bar Kokhba Revolt in 132 CE, both of which ended in catastrophic losses, massacres, and another widespread Jewish diaspora in which Jews were forced to scatter across the Mediterranean and Europe, while at the same time Christianity began to rise within the Roman Empire, turning the Jewish community into scapegoats for the crucifixion of Jesus, intensifying their persecution and marginalization, a reality that continued until 638 CE, when Muslim armies under Caliph Umar conquered Jerusalem and ushered in a new era of Islamic rule that, despite later conflicts, initially allowed for relative religious tolerance, with Jews being permitted to return to Jerusalem after centuries of exclusion, though still under the social status of dhimmi or protected non-Muslim subjects, yet with enough freedom to continue practicing their traditions. And for the following centuries, Jewish life largely centered in Europe, where they endured cycles of discrimination, pogroms, forced conversions, ghettos, and expulsion, even as small Jewish communities persisted in the Holy Land under successive Islamic and Crusader rulers. And then from 1517 to 1917, the Ottoman Empire controlled the region, during which the Jewish population of Jerusalem gradually increased. And by the 19th century, Jews had become the largest religious community in the city. Although under Ottoman law they remained second-class subjects with certain taxes and restrictions, but this period also coincided with the emergence of modern nationalism in Europe, which deeply affected both Jews and Arabs. For on one hand, Jews facing relentless persecution and exclusion in Europe began to embrace Zionism, the political ideology articulated most famously by Theodor Herzl, who in the late 19th century called for the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine as a refuge for Jews, while on the other hand Arab nationalism began to grow in reaction to European colonialism and the fear that Jewish immigration would displace local communities. And this tension escalated in the early 20th century when Britain took control of Palestine after defeating the Ottomans in World War I, and then in 1917 issued the Balfour Declaration, a statement expressing British support for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, which energized Zionist hopes but alarmed Palestinian Arabs. And under the British Mandate after World War I, Jewish immigration surged, often supported by European and American donors, while Arab resentment grew as they saw increasing land sales to Jews and feared marginalization in their ancestral homeland. And this resentment erupted in violent uprisings such as the Arab Revolt of 1936–1939 against both British colonial rule and Jewish immigration, which forced Britain to issue the 1939 White Paper limiting Jewish immigration and proposing a joint Arab-Jewish state. But events in Europe soon changed everything as the horrors of the Holocaust during World War II shocked the world and created overwhelming sympathy for Jews and their demand for a safe homeland, leading to the United Nations in 1947 proposing a partition plan to divide Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states with Jerusalem as an international city, a plan accepted by Jewish leaders but rejected by Arab leaders who saw it as unjust. And when David Ben-Gurion declared the independence of Israel on May 14, 1948, neighboring Arab states immediately launched military intervention in what became known as the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, which Israel not only survived but emerged victorious from, expanding its territory beyond the UN's proposed borders and creating a massive refugee crisis in which over 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes, an event Palestinians remember as the Nakba or catastrophe. And in the following decades conflict remained constant, with skirmishes escalating into major wars such as the Six-Day War of 1967 when Israel preemptively struck Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, capturing the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Golan Heights, dramatically reshaping the map and intensifying Palestinian displacement. And though Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula after the 1978 Camp David Accords with Egypt, it retained control of Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem, fueling Palestinian anger, which erupted in the First Intifada of 1987, a grassroots uprising of civil disobedience, boycotts, and protests that drew worldwide attention to the plight of Palestinians under occupation, eventually leading to the 1993 Oslo Accords where Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO leader Yasser Arafat agreed to mutual recognition and a framework for Palestinian self-rule under the Palestinian Authority. But hopes for peace were dashed by continued settlement building, mutual distrust, and outbreaks of violence that culminated in the Second Intifada beginning in 2000, a far bloodier uprising marked by suicide bombings, Israeli military incursions, and heavy casualties on both sides. And although Israel unilaterally disengaged from Gaza in 2005 by withdrawing settlers and soldiers, this did not bring peace, for in 2007 the militant group Hamas took control of Gaza after clashing with the Palestinian Authority, leading Israel to impose a blockade restricting goods, fuel, and movement into the Strip, a blockade criticized by the UN and human rights groups for creating dire humanitarian conditions. And over the following years cycles of violence became tragically familiar, with rocket attacks launched from Gaza into Israeli cities and devastating Israeli airstrikes in response, as seen in wars in 2008, 2009, 2012, and especially 2014's Operation Protective Edge, which left thousands dead and Gaza's infrastructure shattered. And tensions further escalated in 2018 when the United States moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a decision celebrated by Israel but condemned by Palestinians and much of the international community, as Palestinians feared it signaled the end of hopes for East Jerusalem as their future capital. And though the Abraham Accords of 2020 normalized relations between Israel and Arab states like the UAE and Bahrain, Palestinians felt increasingly sidelined, their cause overshadowed by shifting regional politics, and local tensions over land rights such as in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of East Jerusalem in 2021 sparked violent protests and another full-scale war between Israel and Hamas in May 2021, followed by sporadic escalations in 2022, until October 7, 2023 when the conflict erupted into its deadliest chapter in decades as Hamas launched an unprecedented infiltration into Israel, killing over 1,000 civilians and abducting around 200 soldiers and civilians, an attack that shocked the world and led Israel to declare war. launching massive airstrikes on Gaza that killed thousands of Palestinians, including women and children, according to UN reports, displacing entire neighborhoods and leaving Gaza in ruins, while the world watched with horror as the cycle of retaliation, mistrust, and grief once again consumed both peoples, reminding us that the story of Israel and Palestine is not just about borders or politics, but about two communities whose histories are intertwined yet divided by narratives of trauma, faith, and survival. And as this conflict continues, it forces the global community to ask hard questions about justice, peace, coexistence, and the price of endless war. For the story is long, complex, and unresolved, a reminder of how deeply the past continues to shape the present and how desperately the future cries out for